okay.
The stream is on.
Alright, and then up and over the head.
Yeah.
Oh, I got a bow in. Uh-huh.
Up and over.
Oh well.
That's the
Jan's got a whole
We used
tripod.
to do for
Hey y'all.
This is
What'd you say?
we used to do
Yeah.
the radio station over at Catholic Charities.
Hey y'all, it's Saturday night, and you know what that means. That means we're going to
Thank
talk about human trafficking tonight. So we're about to start at the Noel and Beverly Talk It Up radio show with me. And we've got some really great guests tonight. We've got Wanda Latora, who is an immigration attorney, and we've got Linda Woods from Florida Abolitionist. And she is a, hey Katie, hey Janie, and she is a specialist in labor trafficking and works very closely with Florida Abolitionists here. So I'm going to start tagging people, and we invite you to keep watching the show.
Thank you for joining us today. We're under Hurricane
I'm not in.
Watch.
I'm not plugged in.
Hoping that Hurricane Dorian does not hit Central Florida or any of Florida for that matter. We're praying to turn and
I'm
go
in. Yay. Hey,
our
Mary.
ways, go out to the sea somewhere where it doesn't cause any damage. So please pray for us if you're not in Florida. And those that are in Florida, be
Keep praying.
cautiously
Yeah,
optimistic.
keep praying.
Keep
that
praying.
The hurricane will not come. God is in control no matter what.
Yep.
So today is our human trafficking awareness week. Once a month we do this show with a very special guest, Jan Edwards. Well, it's really her show. I'm just a guest.
You are so
The guest
funny. No, we're
host.
co-hosting, sister. Don't cut yourself short.
She's the CEO of Paving the Way. She has done wonders to shed light on
Here I am.
this dark madness that's going on here. And Noel and I, Talk It Up Radio Show, we're here to join forces with her to rid the society of this terrible, terrible crime. So welcome, Jan.
Thanks. I feel like I haven't seen y'all
I know,
forever.
it's been a while.
You've been a tourist.
I know.
But it's a good tourist though. You're
We
proactive.
had different things happening. Birth. I'm a grandma now.
No way, you're a grandma.
Congratulations.
Oh my gosh,
Yes,
grandma.
Beautiful granddaughter.
Oh, we love grandma.
Yes. So, welcome. She does have a special guest today.
Yes, I do.
And you want to do the honors?
I do. I'm sorry. I'm just tagging away here on Facebook Live so people know. No, I do not want all my guests to join. Hey, Melissa. Hey, Miriam. So tonight we've got two really cool guests, and this is Labor Day. And what a lot of people don't know, because sex trafficking is what makes the news. Everybody talks about sex trafficking. What people don't know is labor traffic. There's actually more people being labor trafficked, domestic servitude, farm work, all of that, hotel maintenance, things like that, than sex trafficking. Right? There's a high propensity of women, girls, and boys to being sex trafficked, but nobody talks about domestic trafficking. And so when we moved this to this weekend, Labor Day weekend, I'm like, what better conversation to have
Perfect.
than about labor trafficking? So that's really what we're going to talk about today. And I've got two extraordinary guests, and I'm not sure who this belongs to. No one. Oh, no one. We have an extra headset, y'all. So we have two extraordinary guests tonight, and the first one I'm going to introduce is Juan de la Torre. So wave hi, Juan.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
And then we've got Linda. There we go. We can see Linda.
Hello.
Linda Woods, and Linda works with United Abolitionists. And, I want to start. This is such a tough topic for a variety of reasons, So we're going to start on the tough part first. And then we're going to move our way over to, it's still challenging. However, it's different when you're starting to talk immigration, right? It's a very challenging topic right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a little history and a little context, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. All right, Juan? So way back when I was running for office, I ended up doing a lot of research about, oops, sorry. Is that better? Okay, good. Sorry, we're fiddling with all the cameras. So I did a lot of research on immigration. And here's what I discovered. We've been dealing with this since the beginning of time.
That's right.
All right. Since we became a country, we still haven't figured it out.
The Constitution makes a reference to it.
Well,
To indentured servitude.
Yeah, exactly. But we as a country have really dealt with, at one point in time, no one from China was allowed in, right? At another point in time, if you didn't have your own teeth, you weren't allowed in. Another point in time, if you
Really?
were seriously.
I thought you were joking.
No, look, I did the research on this.
I didn't know that one, but that's a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, at one point in time, if you were a quote communist, you weren't allowed in. I mean, it was, and where we really, as a nation, where it really like something altered, was in 1965. There was the Hart-Keller Act, and the Hart-Keller Act is when we decided as a country, there's like, okay, we're only going to allow 20,000 people from every country in. That's it. That's our limit. Every country. Now, if you're in Australia, not a problem. If you're in Mexico, it's a little bit of a problem. Because, see, up until that point, it worked. Hundreds of thousands of people came over from Mexico, did what needed to be done in the agricultural space, they made their money, and they went back home. Then this thing happens, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, no, I'm sorry. You and your, 180,000 friends can't come now. So the illegal border crossing started to happen. The United States got a little bit more militarized down there. And now that's really the hugest source of, like, that particular challenge. I was like, oh, my gosh. Well, what do we do to fix that act, right? And then, with everything happening down at the border, and if you talk to, because I've talked to border guards, they say, look, we're not designed to take hundreds of thousands of people. We're not designed for that. We don't know who belongs to who, because coyotes do use children as a method to come over across the border. So, it's heated, it's emotional, it's misunderstood, it's not really talked about. And so I really want to get, like I said on my Facebook post, we're going to have a straightforward conversation about this, right? And that's really where Juan comes in. Is, he's...
So what we'll do, we don't take no break.
Okay, all right, we're going straight through. Wow. You guys hear that?
Yours, Jan.
Hey, Thomas. Hey, Sandra. So, this is really an opportunity for people to, like, really understand immigration. Like, really. Not what's hyped on media, not what somebody's yelling about, not anything else, but in reality, really what we're dealing with. And then I'm going to have Linda come on and really have the conversation about right here, right now, today, literally right down the street at one of the firm farms, or down a little farther south in, I can never pronounce the name. Immokalee.
Although I don't serve Immokalee, but I work down there,
Yeah, down there, right, and what they're dealing with. So, we're going to bring it back home around real, but I want to start with a broader picture and then come on back down. So,
You're going to talk into the mic.
There you
Okay.
go. All right.
So we're sharing a mic?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, and Noel, my purse is around here somewhere, and it's got my water in it. Can you just grab my water? No, I don't.
People usually don't have trouble hearing me. I go to court sometimes, and I say, Your Honor, I don't need the mic. It's fine. It's fine. For some reason, I have a voice that carries. I'm wearing my soccer uniform today. This is the team I coach in East Orlando. So I'm proud of that, and I also got my UCF cap.
Awesome.
All right.
So
Awesome.
go Knights. Go Knights.
Go Knights.
I'm representing my two of my favorite teams today.
Give us a little bit of background of you, like what kind of law, like that, and then let's get into the meat of stuff.
I mainly practice in the areas of criminal and immigration. I've been practicing for almost 10 years. Started my practice in 2010. Yeah.
I thought he was in high school.
I know, right?
Seriously. I thought he was in high school.
Black and brown people age well. My father passed along some really great genes. In our line of work, it's funny that you mentioned that, because in our line of work, I have to leave the gray in.
Right.
There's not going to be any dyeing the gray.
You do. Unlike women.
Yeah, because a lot of times I get, especially when I'm cleanly shaven and everything, I get that sometimes from clients even still. like, how old are you? And I'm like,
Are you sure you can practice law?
Yeah, when I tell them I have 2 kids, and when I tell them I have 2 kids, and that I've been practicing for almost 10 years, and that I'm almost 40 years old, and they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I'm not as young as they. I still get sometimes that I'm in my late 20s, but I guess that's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Very serious topic.
It is.
Very unfortunate. I know that.
And misunderstood.
And right.
Deeply misunderstood.
Deeply misunderstood. I mean, sex trafficking is definitely a huge part of it. Florida's, if I remember the statistics correctly from the last time I covered this topic, we were number 1 in the country.
No, we're actually number 3.
We're number 3. Yeah. We're in the top 3.
Yep.
There we go. In the top 3, I got a different mic now.
Hey.
All right.
You got the big dog mic.
I'm going to leave that alone. We in my office we're pretty loose. We make a lot of jokes, and that would.
They're gonna have a good time with this one.
Yeah, one of my assistants is actually watching right now. I'm sure she's thinking of that.
Did you tag us? Did you tag us all?
I got to figure out how to do that.
All right, well, I'll teach you.
We'll tag
the
you
old
up.
dog will teach the new dogs.
We'll tag you up after the broadcast.
Awesome.
Very very serious topic, obviously, and I think that one of the main things that you've pointed out today is it's not just the sex trafficking; it's also the labor trafficking. Yes. Obviously, I think that the sex trafficking issue is huge in Florida with all the adult establishments that are owned and are reputed to be owned by, in a lot of cases, by underworld organizations that are using adult establishments basically to as fronts, if you will.
Yes.
So that's one thing that has to be taken into account. But then we live in, our top industries are tourism and agricultural. Mm-hmm. And, I've had the pleasure of driving through the state many times, whether it's because I'm going to Glades County Detention Center or Baker County Detention Center and the removal practice and deportation practice, or in other areas of employment that I've had in the past. It's taken me to other areas of the state. And, people tend to forget when you live in a metropolitan like Orlando or Tampa or Miami, basically all South Florida, right?
Right.
And then you got Jacksonville to the north. Outside of the major metropolitans, Florida is largely just an agricultural state. And for miles and miles, I mean, when you hit US 41 and you go straight down to Glades County, I mean, you just see the farms. It's just farm after farm. A lot of farms out there that are owned by families that have owned these farms for centuries. Probably dating back to slavery. So that the labor issue is huge. From a political standpoint, my biggest beef lately is if you looked at the raids that happened recently, where major factories were raided up north. Why aren't the employers being targeted?
It's the same. Why aren't pimps?
Yeah.
Likewise,
it's the exact same conversation.
Why it's
and it's about the money.
Well, people talk about changes in law, and I think that my biggest beef, I guess if you will, is that the law already makes it illegal to hire quote unquote illegals or undocumented individuals, and there are already fines that exist for doing so. There's a reason why you have to provide documentation when you get employed. I mean, I think people lose that when you have your Social Security, when you have your driver's license and your those two things combined. You take for granted that the reason why you're providing that to your employer for a W-9 is really to document the status that you're legal to work in the United States.
Right.
And I think that when you're legal in the United States, that totally flies over your head that that's the reason why it's being done.
Yeah.
It almost comes from
you don't even think about it.
From an HR perspective, it just comes across, it's just normal procedure.
Right.
But when you work in immigration law, I often get the phone call like I'm on the brink of getting fired because my employment, my EAD or employment authorization document, which is otherwise known as a work permit, hasn't arrived. and even the employers don't know the law, right? Because then I call the employer and I'm like, well, let me get on the phone with your HR department, and I'm telling them, I'm like,
Right.
you do realize that once the application is filed, if you file it prior to the expiration, there's a built-in extension. There's a built-in 180-day,
Okay,
six
so I want you
month
to say
extension.
that again slowly.
Right.
Because, like I said, this is the world you swim in, and
Yeah.
there are people listening today
You know,
that one might
Yes.
have this situation, as an employer, or two, they might be right there in that same space. So I
Right.
want you to say, this is what you need to do.
So if you have a work permit, whether it's you've received it through an agricultural visa or through any type of work permit, whether it's because you're pending asylum or any type of document that entitles you to have a work permit, and you're working, and your employer knows that your work permit is going to expire, you have an automatic extension built in, as long as you file the application prior to the expiration of the work permit.
Okay.
All right. So
I
when
didn't know that.
I didn't
right,
know that
so
either. It's
most
important.
applications you file with immigration, not most, excuse me, all applications you file with immigration, particularly the United States Customs and Immigration Service, you're going to receive what's called an I-797 notice of action, right? So
Okay,
once
say it again.
an I-797 notice of action, once you receive that form, it's basically the form that says we've received your paperwork, it's being processed. And once you receive that form, combined with your existing work permit, you can take that to the DMV. They'll grant you an extension on your driver's license.
Okay.
You can take that to your employer, and your employer should grant you 6 months to get the proper paperwork, which is really important because delays are really backlogged right now.
Yes.
There's a huge backlog in immigration, and things are taking a lot longer than they usually do. Normal processing times are getting blown constantly. I'm having to do things such as contact my client's congressman to get congressional intervention.
Wow.
Stephanie Murphy's office has been cooperative. Congressman Darren Soto's office has been cooperative in helping us expedite files and having intervention on behalf of the U.S. citizen, mind you, in cases where the U.S. citizen or U.S. resident is involved and there's a family petition or whatnot. But that's the point. There's extensions built in. The employers don't know it. I had a client working at an auto dealership, and a big auto dealership, I'm not going to name it, but her HR department was like, she needed her driver's license because she sells cars, and she needed her driver's license, and she also needed her work authorization so that she's still within her rights to, the employer still doing the things that they're properly supposed to do, and they were going to terminate her. And I had to get on the phone with HR and argue this point, and it's crazy to me because you go to USCIS.gov, which is
Hang on, I'm going to type that in. Hang on.
So they can find all that information.
it's right there. USCIS
.gov.
Right, and there you can look at pretty much any form, and then it has citations. You can pull up the Immigration Nationality Act. The forms themselves provide instructions, provide information, and one of the key things on a renewal for an EAD, it's like on page 1 of the form instructions and everything. It says, as long as you file this prior to the expiration, you have a built-in extension for 180 days.
Yes, but I want to address this because this is super important, because if I am hired by a third party, maintenance, housekeeping,
right,
lawn care, construction, and I don't know this, right, and maybe my English isn't as strong that I can't really fully read what this is, nor has anyone given this to me, or for me to know, like, what is there that we can, because I promise you, every single person in this room and every single person listening, through whatever venue, someone who has a family member, it might be them, that they don't know this.
Right. Well, yeah.
How many of them have been let go as a result?
Yeah.
To my recollection, none of the ones that I represent, but
That's important.
but I'm sure that this is obviously an issue where people get let go.
It really is.
And another aspect of that, since we're on the topic, is that when there's an issue of somebody maybe getting let go, like my client at the auto dealership, you can request emergency expediting of the file, and they will push that up. We did that in that particular case and ended up getting a response within 30 days,
Right.
which is funny to me because we got the response in 30 days, but in those 30 days, they finally bought my my theory, or
Yes.
it's not even a theory; it's on the website, it's on the government, and the funny part arguing this to an HR department is like, it's not me saying this,
Right. Here,
It's
go
the-
here,
it's-
look here.
It's the United States government, it's on their website, not mine,
Right.
So that's one of the things that really cracks me up is when people just don't read what's right in front of them. And
Right.
one last thing I'll say, just in commenting to the language aspect of it, if you're capable of doing this for your family, the Google is just amazing. Chrome is just amazing with the things it can do. There's an automatic built-in function in the upper right-hand corner. It will completely translate any governmental website, or I think any website, from English to your native language.
Wow.
So like right now I'm dealing a lot with Brazilian clients, and one of my colleagues, he always has it up in Portuguese.
Sure.
Everything's up in Portuguese. So that's an amazing tool to use. And I'm glad that you had me on the show. Thank you to everybody at 1680 WOKB. I'm glad to be here. And go Knights.
I want to stay right there for a minute, and then we'll come over to Linda. In sex trafficking, when someone is rescued, right, and they were brought here from a different country, there's a process that they go through. Right, and whether it's in reality, I'm just more familiar with sex trafficking.
Right.
I'm just not as familiar as I am with labor trafficking, even though there's more labor trafficking than sex, right?
Right.
Which is why I have you on the show today, so you know. If I'm a potential victim, because here's what I want you two to know, and all y'all, so I'm going to turn the camera so you guys can see me talking too. Sorry, so it's not just my voice. Is we've actually, off of this show, saved lives.
Awesome.
Because of what we've talked about what we've shared, the numbers we've given, we've saved lives, right? And that's really what we're committed to doing on this show, is providing valuable information that people may not know, that actually may be in trouble. And I don't mean trouble with the law, but they're in a situation that they're choosing not to be in.
Yes.
Someone's got their passport. They're forced to be there. They're in a locked, in a locked trailer, in a locked closet. That if by chance they hear this, we want them to call the number, and I'm going to have you say it in Spanish.
Okay.
We want them to call 888 3737 888, and that's the National Trafficking Hotline number, and they can call it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's 210 languages available.
210 languages.
Yeah. So I really want people to hear in their native language. 3737 888-3737.
Empezó con 888.
Yes, got the Spanish.
888-3737-888. La línea para contactar y recibir ayuda para las personas que son víctimas del tráfico humano. 888-3737-888.
Yes, brilliant.
Muy bien.
Muy bien, muy bien. I could have done it too, but it just sounds better with his voice.
I know it does.
You know, is when they call and they're rescued. Talk to me, because I cheated. I saw some of his papers. I want you to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so I'm familiar more with the U visa. I've actually done those in the past, and so I did some homework and saw what the difference. the glaring differences between U and T may be. They're very similar. So we're talking about the U visa and the T visa. The U visa is essentially for victims of crimes, which ironically includes one of the crimes that are included or enumerated for this would be involuntary servitude,
domestic servitude,
human trafficking, slave trade, domestic servitude.
Lawn care?
Yes, I mean basically anything that involves.
Well, those are the
Okay, Linda, go.
Yeah. Basically being forced to work against your will.
Right.
Yes.
There's
right.
some 50 or 51 crimes that are enumerated
Right.
that would qualify.
Okay.
See,
Linda, since you're talking, introduce yourself and then keep on going.
Hi, I'm Linda Leonard Woods, and I work for Florida Abolitionists, henceforth called United Abolitionists, as a specialist working with immigrants. And so my background is that I actually ran the English as I was director of English as a second language services in St. Louis, Missouri, for the last 12 years of my 31-year teaching career. And during this time, became very involved with my families in the ESL. And actually, if you ask the superintendent and the principals that I worked under, I probably spent more time doing social services than I did actually teaching. In fact, they finally hired a bunch of teachers that worked under me so that I had the ability to go, someone dies in a family, they have no one to speak on their behalf to make funeral arrangements. It was all kinds of out there things.
You
and
don't think
the
about.
biggest issue that we had was people going to regular attorneys, and that's awesome, but they weren't immigration attorneys, and therefore they didn't know immigration law, and they would take $5,000 or $6,000 from our families to work on their immigration problem, and nothing ever got done. And then suddenly I get to school the next morning and find out that so-and-so's family got picked up by ICE, Immigration and Customs, by Border Patrol, during the night, and that family now is in deportation hearings, and now I'm trying to deal with something, a couple hundred miles away sometimes, and there's really not much you could do. So one of the things that, as the ESL director, I did was to try to make sure that students knew that we had some background. We had a couple of attorneys that were bilingual that could actually help them. Very different scenario down here in that we have many more attorneys that do speak Spanish or another language, thank goodness. Right. St. Louis was very, very backward that way, and so it was critical that we get them to a reputable attorney who was an immigration attorney and who knew what they were doing and could also deal with the language barrier. As Juan said, Babbel, Google, all of these do help, but it's always better if you have someone that can speak your native language.
Well, and to explain it to you.
Yeah.
I think that to go one step further from what you're saying is that another thing to be very critical and mindful of is the issue of individuals that are the victims of the unauthorized practice of law. And a very common thing within immigration, and I was just dealing with this past week, is, and it's bad enough to get bad advice from a lawyer.
Right. Exactly.
I mean.
Now I know why Rick likes you so much.
We're human too, So, I mean, it's bad enough to get bad advice because you didn't hire an immigration lawyer, or even if you did hire an immigration lawyer and they just didn't know the answer. But even worse to get that bad advice when you're getting it from a person who's not even authorized to practice law. And there's these entities that set up to do this. I mean, one that we were dealing with this past week was a Brazilian client hires an entity that had offices in Canada and Brazil. And then I'm looking at them like, you do realize why they don't have offices in the U.S.
One of these things,
Right. I mean, they don't have offices in the U.S. because they're breaking the law. And to the extent that, it's not only the unauthorized practice of law, it has civil penalties, but potentially criminal penalties. But they're outside of our jurisdiction, so it makes it harder to get a hold of them.
And if I could just add to that, interestingly enough, and it was before I moved here to Orlando, but I have had several Filipinos come to me and say that they were supposed to renew their documentation and go through a process, and they went to a company that was operating out of Brazil but had an office here, and some of the hotels told them, oh, go to them and they'll work through this with you. Turns out they were not authorized. They were scammers basically, and so they took money from these people, and now they actually would have qualified for a U visa. But I'm certified as a Board of Immigration Appeals representative, but I'm not currently practicing. I work at Hope Community Center in their citizenship and immigration department, loosely teaching classes and so on. But I feel for people because there's such vulnerability, and they take people at face value. I have to say, most immigrants are so much more respectful than most. Everything is ma'am and sir and very polite, and so they go and they pay their money, and then boom, they get frauded out of their money.
Right.
And the problem is that with a U visa, and I'll let Juan, since he's our full-fledged attorney, address this, but with a U visa, you not only have to have a good, strong police report, but you also have to have it certified by a judge.
Yeah, that's the big
and
obstacle.
and after a certain period of time, it's very hard to find. So I get a lot of calls from people saying, this happened to me 6 years ago, and my whole life has fallen apart as a result of not really having my status anymore and everything. And I feel bad, but we can't always do something, even though there's not a time limit on it. Getting that certified is a problem.
Right.
Well, I want to. There's something she mentioned when she was talking, that the hotel sent her to
a particular place.
I mean, that hotel is getting money from that person.
Maybe.
Yeah, because what is the hotel doing? Sending.
Well, that's a common thing in Latin America. Everybody's getting a kickback down there. Yeah, in Latin America, and you go down there, and the taxi driver that's taking you to a restaurant gets a kickback from the restaurant.
Right.
So it better be good. But I'm just saying, but yeah,
the law of reciprocity.
It's a cultural thing where kickbacks are just a normal thing, and I don't think it's just Latin America. I think it's just and basically anywhere outside the United States, but even here though, right? Even here people get kickbacks.
Sure. Absolutely. Concierge, they partner with other restaurants.
So the difference is that, and this is why the importance of hiring a licensed attorney is that attorneys are not allowed to give kickbacks. We can give referrals between attorneys to attorney, but not to anyone who's not a licensed attorney. It's not allowed. And they do that precisely to try to keep the practice of law within the ethical boundaries of what we do.
Let me just do a quick station.
Sure.
Okay, so you're listening to the Talk It Up radio show on WOKB 1680 AM. Okay.
Yes, we are on the Talk It Up radio show. So, so we're clear about the U visa. Let's talk a little bit about the T visa, because trafficking, sex trafficking, domestic servitude, labor trafficking.
Right.
Let's have people understand the difference between the T visa and the U visa, and there's technically plenty of them.
One of those differences is particularly the one that our colleague just mentioned, is that the U visa cannot be processed without a certification.
Got it.
Right? And that the weird part is explaining this to someone who otherwise would not have started. I got one that's still pending that was filed approximately 2 years ago.
Wow.
Like asylums, they take forever to process. I get my client calls all the time, especially with everything that's going on, and I'm like, we got nothing new. There's nothing new.
Right.
I still send the occasional letter to immigration just for them to tell me that you're still on the wait list.
Yeah, we're still working on it.
We're still working on it. But it was a case out of Polk County, and his brother and him were the victims of a shooting. His brother was shot twice and died, and there was a full-blown murder investigation, and there was also a murder trial. The suspect was apprehended. My client did participate and cooperate with the authorities, attended depositions, testified in those depositions, testified at trial, and then the form basically says that the state attorney's office can certify U visas, and that law enforcement, so in this case Polk County Sheriff, can Polk County Sheriff's Office can certify. So I contact Polk County, and they don't want to certify it. And I contact the state attorney's office, and they don't want to certify it.
Polk County
And-
Sheriff Sheriff Grady.
Yeah.
I love that man.
Well, it might have been prior to his tenure.
Okay.
I don't.
He is like a force of nature.
Right.
Oh,
I don't want to call anybody out unnecessarily, but they wouldn't certify it. But the sheriff's office
the
wouldn't
sheriff's
certify.
office, we don't-
Yeah,
yeah,
the
okay,
sheriff's
got it.
office and the state attorney's office wouldn't certify it. And I was at an impasse, and my client was highly upset with me, and I kept telling him, I was like, this is not within my control.
Right.
The first part is that law enforcement, the state attorney's office, anyone who doesn't practice immigration law doesn't understand the very essential concept here. By certifying it, they're not granting that individual any type of immigration status. None whatsoever.
Okay, repeat that again
just
for all of our
certifying
law
it.
enforcement people.
So this
So
is
want them to really
any
get
time
this.
to when Joe Lopez ran, when we got a candidate out in Osceola County. He's running right now. I address this issue with everyone who's running for sheriff. I'm like, do you understand what's your position on the certification? Number one, and number two, do you understand that it doesn't grant any status? It's basically saying you're basically certifying. It's almost like an affidavit. Is really what it is. It's an
Yeah.
affidavit that says that Joe, who's a victim, or maybe Juan or Jose, who knows. This is Juan, but I'm Juan. Is a victim of a crime. That's all you're certifying. And then along the process, they may ask you to recertify and say, is Juan cooperating? Is he providing? Is he attending depositions? Is he providing information? And it took a little bit of lawyering to the extent of looking at case law, rereading that statute over and over again, and then it said something about a judge, and I said to myself, like, why don't I take a shot in the dark? Judges tend to be a little more open-minded, and I said to myself, like, I'm gonna write a letter to the judge, and I'm gonna explain some of the circumstances. I'm gonna include the certification, and see what happens. And he certified it. Judge certified it.
Okay.
So we got in the game. Judge certified it.
So law enforcement.
So law enforcement
State
wouldn't certify it.
attorney's
State attorney's
office.
office, they wouldn't certify it, but the judge certified it.
And judges
Yeah.
can
Judges
certify
can
it too.
certify
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the judge did certify it. One of the presiding judges. And if you know anything about criminal law on murder cases, they can last a long time. So he was actually one of the first judges that was presiding over the cases. By the time I wrote him, he was actually off the case. But he took a look. I guess he took a look at the file. I included some information in there, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll certify it." And he certified it, and we got our foot in the door, and we were able to file. But that is
was
one of
for
the
a
huge.
U visa.
Yes. So now you asked me about the T visa. So on the T visa, the law enforcement cooperation and cooperation with the authorities is still required. But in 2006, there was an exception, particularly for younger victims, which is basically what they call the trauma exception.
Yes.
So you don't have to cooperate to the extent. Well, let me rephrase that. You should still cooperate, but you don't have to be a participant in the process to the extent that you have to be with the U visa.
So if you're
you
a
will.
minor
Yes.
and you're trafficked across the border,
Right.
and you're rescued, you run away,
Correct.
whatever that is,
Correct.
right? I as the victim, I don't have to look at my I don't have to stand before the person that trafficked me and talk. I can get a deposition, or I can do a video, and I can certify that way that's what happened to me. So I don't really ever have to, because the thing about any kind of trafficking is the trauma,
Yes.
and having them repeat the story over and over
Right.
and over and over
And
again.
that's such a crapshoot, and that's such a difficult topic to face. And I'm just putting on my criminal defense cap on because, I mean, that's a common thing that I do as a criminal defense attorney. Is that
Yeah.
I want all the Leos involved, law enforcement agents
Right.
involved, to have the same story. I want the victim to have the same story. That these things should be cooperated. So I'm taking these depositions specifically to look at where are the inconsistencies, and does that inconsistency potentially poke a hole in the case. So yeah, it's hard. I in the past 2 years.
So they don't have, I want to come back around, so they don't have to do that. They just have to give a deposition and then they're complete?
Well,
Because what do you mean by,
I think that there's combinations of, to the extent that the exception, our representative, our colleague here from that works with the BIA may be able to better answer that question. The
Yeah.
T is not my strong suit.
I'm
But-
about to turn the video over there so we can get
from a
clarity.
criminal standpoint, especially
Right.
with younger victims, there are exceptions to allow a video deposition to be admissible into court in place of that witness having to testify in court,
Right.
precisely so that they don't have to relive the story in front of
Yes.
the person that's being the
Accused.
person that did that to them.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
aptly
Yes.
put in that context.
They're trafficker.
Correct. But the Confrontation Clause, Sixth Amendment, is what governs there in the criminal context. So the defense attorney has to have the opportunity to confront that witness, and the deposition could satisfy that.
Okay, good.
And then what the courts sometimes do in order to get over the trauma situation is that the video deposition in its entirety then becomes admissible in criminal court.
Okay, good. Awesome. So Linda,
And,
you have quite a bit
One
to say
other
about
thing,
this.
so I just,
We're all
again,
ears.
because this is really important, when you're not practicing as a BIA, it's kind of like being a real estate agent but not placing your broker's license at the time. So it's like claiming, have you ever claimed to be a U.S. citizen if you're not? So I want to claim that I am currently not practicing as a BIA, but I did do my legal internship and I passed the test and everything. So, but one of the things that we see that is always, even though there are 5,000 T visas available, which doesn't sound like very much, but believe it or not, they don't all get used up in a year, which is
Exactly.
amazing. But if you look at both the T visa and the U visa, and in any of them, and I'll talk about VAWA in a minute also, but if you look at these visas, if people get denied, now I'm basically flagging myself for possible deportation.
Yes.
So this is a big thing. I'm currently working with a client.
Hang on, I want to step over that. So if I work with Juan and I'm I'm whatever that is got me there, and I'm applying for one of these visas and they deny me for whatever reason, then I just want to recreate what you said to me. Then they could actually be flagged by ICE. So that's another. I'm not going to do that.
I mean, a lot of people are very hesitant to do this,
I
and
get
it's
it.
the first thing that they always ask us.
I think that you have to assess the strength of your client's
Yes,
case.
case,
And,
exactly.
I just used that murder case as an example, but I had a domestic violence situation where the victim in that case never filed any police report.
Right.
It was one incident, if my recollection serves correct, and I had to get to the point where I was like, listen, you don't have a good case. And she was upset with me to that extent, that, well, so how do I build a case? And then I told her how to build a case. I said, well, why don't you go see a psychologist and explain. If it wasn't just the physical abuse, I mean, you had one instance of physical abuse, and you're saying that there was a verbal abuse that was ongoing. We need evidence to prove that. And this is just a hard
Could be a
concept for people to
statement by
understand.
someone
Yeah.
saying that they saw you constantly
right.
being verbally abused.
Using affidavits, psychological evaluations,
So
something
it's-
to
so it's by
corroborate
case,
your
but-
story.
But
Corroborate your story.
Because to me, it's like whisper down the lane a lot of times. Because a lot of times that's how coyotes get people here. America, the land of the golden, free, et cetera, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I hear that it's awesome, and so I'm going to send my kids, and I get here and it's not that. Same thing.
So let me go back and
Please.
address really quickly, since we're talking
Yeah.
about a domestic violence. So in order to qualify for VAWA, which is violence against, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong
Well,
thing.
you can look
Which
at
is
both.
Violence
You can
Against
look at
Women
both.
Talk
Act.
between both.
Which is Violence Against Women Act. You would have to be a person who came here, say, on a K-1 visa to marry a person who is a lawful permanent resident or a citizen, and then that person abuses you. I have a sad but perfect example of this. I'm working with a young woman who from another county. And I will give a shout out actually to Polk County on this one. The officers there are very, very well trained about domestic violence and sex trafficking.
They are.
Unfortunately, I get a lot of cases from Polk County for labor trafficking and labor, and nobody is doing
Understands
anything or understands it. So they're very highly trained in this. She does not speak, she's starting to learn a little bit of English, but this was a year and a half ago almost. She did not speak a word of English. 3 officers who did not speak Spanish showed up at her house at the place where they were living. And so this man, who actually is from a foreign country himself, but is a citizen, a naturalized citizen, he said, well, I'm calling the police. She was tearing up pictures of his pornography, some of it minor age, and saying, this is disgusting, you just married me, why are you doing this? So he called the police on her, and he had been abusive to her, and he had also told her that they were going to go on a big honeymoon, and instead that honeymoon was going over to Tampa and telling her she was either going to have to dance in a strip club or do massages with sexual favors after, because how did she think she was going to pay for the paperwork that was required for her to become a citizen? Foolish girl. And he called her all kinds of bad names, and he was physically and verbally abusive. So at any rate, we started working with her. She was taken to a domestic violence shelter, but then they soon realized there is no such thing as intent to traffic, and that hurts us a lot with both labor and sex trafficking. So
I gotta write
we
that
looked
down,
at this
yeah.
and said, how can we approach this? I work a lot with Anna Roberts at Orange County Legal Aid. They provide pro bono services for clients who are, in financial dire straits, often removed from the streets. And so part of my job is, as a trained BIA, is to look and listen to these cases and evaluate. Sometimes people are just looking to be a way to get into the United States, and quite frankly, we can't help everyone, right? Even though I had a case the other day where somebody was traveling as a nanny from another country, and she's from yet another one, and the guy was holding her passport. So I talked to the connection we have through Hope Community Centers program with the liaison at USCIS, and she goes, well, he is holding her documentation, so maybe we could do something. But that's a whole nother, now we've got 3 countries involved, where she comes from, where she's nannying, and only being here as a visitor. Had they been living here, we could have done something, but it's kind of tentative. But anyway, back to the young lady I was talking about. So they removed her, took her to a domestic violence shelter, and then we were called to say, can you assign an advocate who speaks Spanish? And I am bilingual. I don't look like I with blonde hair, blue eyes. But yeah. And so Tomas then assigned me to the case, and I've been working with her for almost a year and a half now. But she was removed, so it was my job to see that she gets the proper counseling, to see that we got her into the Orange County Safe House, to take her through this process and say, what can we do? And so we looked at it. There was an intent to traffic, but there was no trafficking. So therefore, we said, okay, what did happen? Well, she was definitely a victim of domestic violence. So we have applied for the VAWA, which with the VAWA, the good thing with that is you eventually will get the EAD, the work authorization. And it took a very long time, but we finally took her in July, and we're able to, after we got the EAD card, to get a temporary Social Security number under which she can file. And I'm very happy to report she just started working a week and a half ago while I was on vacation. Yay! We love good success stories, yes. Yeah. But now, what happens is during this time, and we've been told, I've been talking with other attorneys and BIAs, and it will likely take up to 2 years to find out if she actually gets approved for VAWA. Now, she is prepared for the fact that if this happens...
The Board of Immigration Appeals.
Board of Immigration Appeals, sorry. BIA, yeah. And the VAWA that we're talking is Violence Against Women Act.
Oh, okay.
And so when a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident who has authority to be here takes advantage, abuses in some way a spouse, then they can apply for VAWA.
And VAWA is also super important for Native American Indians, for
Yeah.
indigenous tribes, because it.
Well, although they wouldn't have to, I mean, they would be citizens. They wouldn't.
No.
Oh, you're talking
no,
about-
I'm talking tribal citizens.
Oh.
If I'm on the tribe and Juan comes into my nation, right? He's in my nation, and he harms me, and he leaves. There's nothing that we can do about it. He has to. We have to, because he's not a citizen of the nation. And that's why there's so much violence
I have
against
no
indigenous
experience with that.
women.
Do you, Juan?
Oh yeah.
That's a new one to me.
Yeah, I did
yeah.
not know that.
Yeah, that's why up in South Dakota where all the oil and all that's happening, they're the indigenous women are the highest number of percentage of women that are raped and murdered in the country.
We knew that when
Minorities.
we listened to Jan on this show.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
See,
You gotta
they
listen to Jan.
You gotta listen to
And
the
then
listen to stuff
show.
there's also
the
forms
channel
of
show.
relief, and I won't take time to go into it, but for special immigrant juvenile status, there are some things that can be done for them also. I work only with adults, so I'm not as familiar with that, but I know Anna has processed some SIJs.
My colleague's been doing that for years,
Has she?
and he.
Okay.
Guillermo Maceda, who was actually my intern when he was at Barry, and I'll just mention his name because I think that the work that he's done is amazing. Working for a nonprofit in Miami, and he did a lot of dependency cases. So basically, for juvenile cases where that juvenile crossed the border, quote unquote, illegally or whatever, that if they can be placed in a home with a relative who's legal,
Family member.
and that person becomes their legal guardian, then basically they're under the shelter of that legal guardian who's legally here, and they get to stay. And he worked, and there's a combination there between family law and also immigration, obviously. And I wanted to jump into, before I get there,
Well, and just to give you a 411, we got 9 minutes.
Yes.
I know, it goes super fast.
two things real quick. The one that our colleague was bringing up, the importance of the evidence is just.
Yes.
If there's one class I always say to my interns is like, I think the most important class in law school is evidence. People come in and they're like, it's just wrong, and I'm like, I understand that, but if you can't prove your case,
Right.
then it could, life isn't fair. I understand that. So there's that. Number two, recent case, and kind of ties everything that we're talking about together, is just people not understanding the ramifications of what they're getting themselves into. I had a client came in on an agricultural visa, came in legally. He decided to stay. All right, granted, he overstayed.
Well, and that, by the way, there's almost a million people in overstayed visa, which is more than
more than the people that cross.
that are crossing the border illegally.
Yeah.
Yes.
They come on visas and they stay.
Yeah.
That's the majority.
I've joked about it, and I said, you want to curb illegal immigration? What are you going to do? You just shut down the borders and not allow anybody to fly in, because most of the illegal people in the country, quote unquote, I just don't like the word. That's why I keep saying quote unquote. But undocumented individuals that are in the United States are actually here on an overstay. This individual was here on an overstay. Now, these individuals are targeted in Mexico. So this is a small town by laborers recruiters who recruit these individuals to come into the United States, and they sell them the pipe dream. They sell them a dream that says, you know what, we're going to get you documentation, you're going to get into the United States, and you're going to be able to stay in the United States legally with the ability to work and all that under an assumed name.
Hang on.
I think I've said this before. That happened to me.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s.
That happened to Noah.
And they sell you.
3 years I worked here and keep saying, oh, extension,
Right.
and then I was voluntarily deported because you haven't earned the extensions.
Right.
Well, and this is a little bit different.
Yeah. More harsh.
In this case, they actually, this is a criminal ring in Florida. It's still an active investigation. I'm more at liberty to discuss about it, but it's still an active investigation, and they basically walk people into the DMV. I mean, to the actual DMV, and get them to get documents under assumed name. And it's poignant that we live in the community that we do, because often the individuals that are used are Puerto Rican nationals because they already have citizenship status. Excuse me. And their names are used in place of these individuals, and then now they weren't.
But I would think they have the technology to see that it's not
them.
Well, let's just say they figured it out. I kind of argued to DHS that my guy was the victim in it, but of course that their argument
they
was
have
that he was a
evidence.
willing participant.
And they have evidence.
And there was evidence. There was evidence.
See?
There was a DHS database compared to a Florida Department of Highway Safety Motor Vehicle database.
Linda, you were going to say something?
There was
So the very first case that I ever worked to try to walk alongside someone as an immigrant survivor advocate, and we actually were not able to help a lot, but she's become a very good friend of mine, spends all the holidays with me and everything. But she does go and talk. I do interpreting for her and stuff. But it was very sad because I said, well, I was making a presentation in Spanish to a very large Spanish-speaking church here in town, and a wonderful, wonderful church, by the way. And I said to her, well, she raised her hand and she said in Spanish, I think I've been a victim of this. And I said, well, let's talk after the meeting. Let me finish the presentation. They did. I said, well, how in the world, if this was all happening down in Kissimmee along 192 in the hotels, how did you end up here? And she said, oh, because the trafficker and her girlfriend go to church here. And they were bringing me. And then this started a whole conversation at the church with one of the female pastors who was starting the anti-human trafficking ministry, and said, oh, honey, you know what? We have to keep guards at the doors now because people assume that churches are great places. We'll do drug deals there. Nobody will know anything. Or we'll do. So, I mean, I think we all have to take off our rose-colored glasses.
We do. And, we haven't even gotten to what to look for in hotels and restaurants.
Yeah.
I think we might have to have another show.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
I would like to say one thing, if I may, because this is really important to me,
Yes.
being that I work at Hope Community Center and help out there and with the farm worker community. So I'm sure everyone has heard that recently Ken Cuccinelli, I can't say his name, who is Trump's new was just named about 6 weeks ago, Trump's head of
no idea who this guy
USCIS. Well, yeah, so he came out with a statement, very bold and brazen, that Emma Lazarus's poem that was written to be put on the plaque at the base of the Statue of Liberty in 1903 when they were raising money for it, when it said, let me make sure I get this, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Mm-hmm. He said that really didn't mean, all it was talking about was Anglo-Europeans coming, and it really didn't apply to anybody else. And so for anybody that might be listening out there, I apologize on behalf of the buffoon system that we have going on that treats people like they don't matter, because the fact of the matter is all people matter. And I would say that
I do want to distinguish something though, because one thing that I was able to realize in attending the AILA National Conference is that there was a sentiment by some of the liaisons that were speaking at the conference where you could just tell in their body language where it's like, I don't agree, but their body language is saying, I don't agree, but it was like, this is what we've been ordered to do.
Sure.
This is what we've been ordered to do. So I just want to remind people that, the people that necessarily work within the administrative bodies don't necessarily agree, but they're administrators and they have to execute the policies of the United States.
Or they get fired. We keep a
Or they get
scorecard
fired.
in the changing cabinet of the President Trump.
Well,
I would like to give a
and,
couple
and
of...
hang on, we got 2 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes.
We'll talk about it after the show.
It is. I'm not available next Saturday, but let's talk about the following Saturday. So hang on. I want to leave people with action, right? So what can someone do in the realm of labor trafficking that you've seen? Like, what's an action someone can take, Linda?
So a couple of quick things, and this is just a small way. 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess, my husband and I went to Immokalee, Florida, which is not in the 7 counties that I serve here, but as a member of the Farm Worker Advisory Board, we do serve the Miami-Dade area, Immokalee, Fellsmere, Pearson, and the main office is here in Apopka. hadn't really thought about it. You know, with an H-2A visa being tied to a specific employer or a conglomerate, these people pick here in Florida from November 1, barring any hurricanes and uprooting of the crops and stuff,
Linda, we have
until
less than
the
60
end.
seconds.
And then, so we started a campaign to help feed the farm workers during the off season. Look for Labor Justice Now on Facebook, and I'll have information posted in the next after the hurricane.
Okay,
Labor
good.
Justice
Labor
Now.
Justice Now.
But we
Type
have
that in.
a bunch of books that I'd like to. I don't know if we can put anything
I
up on
can-
resources,
yeah, I can put 'em up
but
on my Facebook
yeah,
page.
we'll do that because there's a lot of really good books out there called like Nobody's by John Bowe and different people
good.
that
Good,
people
good,
could
good.
read to understand
Yes.
more about labor trafficking
Great.
and what industries it goes on in.
And thank you so much.
Wait, and one thing we can do besides call the Human Trafficking Hotline.
Well, I'm always happy to help, and even if your family member doesn't have funds or doesn't have the ability to do so, call my office. I will try to get you in contact with Catholic charities
What's your number?
or nonprofits that can help. Our phone number is 407-733-0640, 407-733-0640.
And I want to, in Espanol,
407-733-0640, 407-733-0640. Delatory Law will be happy to help you at least find the resources. If you can't afford us, we'll help you try to find resources that you can't afford.
awesome. And I want to end with you matter, right? Pick up the phone and call because y'all matter.
Yes,
Have a
thank
good
you.
night.
And thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next week, same place, same time. God bless you all.